Prologue, the world we know. There are things in this world that history chose to forget, buried so thoroughly that most people alive today would laugh if you tried to explain it to them. 2,000 years ago, the world did not belong to humanity. It belonged to others who preyed on them. Vampires walked as lords over cities that no longer carry their names. Werewolves governed territories that are now lost to the sea. Demons held court and governed all. The Fae made deals with humanity where the price was paid through multiple generations. Succubi moved through human lives, working havoc and harnessing the power of human desires, and there was nothing humans could do about it. Humans existed in that world to serve those other beings. They went through their entire lives suffering for a very long time, unable to break free. But humans are patient creatures, and through their endurance, they were able to build a resistance that rivaled even the greatest demons. It took families burying their dead over and over again before things came into shape. Humanity had to study their captors carefully and secretively, fearing that one small mistake would spell their doom. It took a very long war, and losses on every side that no one who lived through it ever fully recovered from before the old order finally broke. After the war, the non-human populations went into hiding. They sheltered themselves in communities and retracted from human affairs. They opened schools that later passed for private institutions and learned to live in hiding, to camouflage themselves, while humans gained more and more power. The history of what they had once been faded from human memory over the centuries until it became myth, nothing more than stories told to children at bedtime. But some old human families remembered and carried the tradition to protect humanity at all costs. Those were the families that had lost the most in the old war, the ones who had seen and recounted stories of what unchecked power in the hands of non-human beings looked like. Those families gathered everything that they knew, preserved it, and passed it from generation to generation, determined to build something that would last and to protect humanity from ever falling under that shadow again. They called themselves the Umbra Vanatori. Over centuries, the organization grew larger than anyone ever expected, to the point that even some non-humans who had fought against their own kind came forward and joined. They were the half-bloods, the defectors, and those who could not tolerate abuse of any kind, who came together and dedicated themselves to the organization. The founding families took them in with open arms. The mantra of the Umbra Vanatori is simple: to protect humankind. Today there are different chapters all over the world. They have infiltrated every corner of human affairs, from education systems to justice systems, putting rulers into place and funding elections. They are the unseen hand in the background, carefully keeping the balance in check. This is not a story about ancient wars or the long, complicated politics of different species trying to work together. This is a much smaller story than that. This is the story of a young succubus who had the resolve to pack one bag, run away from home, borrow a human name, and enroll in a human university, all in the quest to experience what they believed to be a normal life. But like all stories, things go about as smoothly as you would expect. Welcome to the Portal Library. Step through and let the magic begin. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday. Dreambound, a fantasy short story. Chapter 1, The Community. Nyla had lived her entire life inside a lie. The community sat tucked behind the kind of neighborhood that humans drove past without a second glance, gated, quiet, unremarkable from the outside. But past the gate, past the carefully maintained human-facing facade, the streets widened into something older. The architecture carried centuries in its bones. The gardens were immaculate. The air felt different here, heavier somehow. It was home. It had always been home. And for as long as Nyla could remember, it had felt like a room with no windows. The community was not poor. That was one of the things humans would never have guessed if they somehow stumbled past the gate. Centuries of careful accumulation had made sure of that. There were old families here with more wealth than most human dynasties, sitting quietly on fortunes built long before any living human's great-grandparents were born. They had resources, influence, and deep roots in a world that did not know they existed. What they did not have, and what they guarded against with the same seriousness that humans once guarded against them, was exposure. Everything here was deliberate. The clothes were modern but conservative. The technology was current but used sparingly and carefully, always with one eye on what it might accidentally reveal. Children, or whatever word applied to the young ones here, were taught from the very beginning that the human world was close, and that closeness was a danger, not an invitation. Humans were not hated, not exactly. It was more complicated than that. The older members of the community spoke about them with a specific kind of bitterness. Humans had taken everything from them once, had driven them here into hiding. The community had survived. They reminded themselves of that often. They had survived, and they had endured, and they had built something that would last. But survival and contentment are not the same thing, and Nyla had learned early that there was a current of resentment running underneath the community's careful surface that never fully went away. She had grown up swimming against it without quite knowing why. Succubi were not born the way humans were born. There were no parents in the traditional sense, no single pair of people whose choices led to a child. Desire was the beginning of everything for their kind, not casual desire, but the deep, consuming kind, the kind that built over years between two beings until it reached a pressure that the world could not contain quietly. When that happened, something emerged. The community received them and raised them collectively until the time came to assign a guardian. Nyla had watched it happen once when she was still very young. A small gathering near the center of the community, quiet and procedural, the way the community handled most things of significance. A guardian was chosen based on compatibility, on temperament, on what the young one would need. It was not emotional. It was not a celebration. It was an assignment handled with the same calm seriousness as everything else here. She had not thought much about it then until recently. Mara did not look ancient. That was the first thing anyone noticed about her, and then immediately understood was beside the point. She looked somewhere in her mid-40s by human reckoning, tall and composed. She had fed well for centuries, and it showed in the way she moved. The older members of the community deferred to her without being asked. The younger ones were simply afraid of her, which she seemed to find mildly tedious. She had been assigned to Nyla 7 years ago, and in those 7 years she had been many things, demanding, exacting, occasionally frightening, and underneath all of it, genuinely invested in Nyla's development. She wanted Nyla to be great. She had decided this and pursued it with the same focused energy she had apparently once used to make entire human courts bend to her will across 3 continents. Nyla found this exhausting on a level that was difficult to fully articulate. It was not that Mara was wrong about everything. She was right about most things, which was its own particular problem. But there was a shape to the life Mara was preparing her for, a clear and specific outline of what a succubus of Nyla's potential was supposed to become. And every time Nyla thought of it, she felt something in her chest pull in the opposite direction. The other young succubi were not like this. Nyla had observed that for years with a mix of genuine curiosity and trepidation. They were ambitious. They wanted things that existed inside the community's frame of reference: status, power, strong feeds, respected positions in the hierarchy that the older generations had built and maintained across centuries. They studied their craft seriously and applied it and measured their progress against each other. Nyla did not think less of them for it. She had tried more than once to want what they wanted. To look at the path laid out in front of her and feel something other than the persistent, wordless sense that it led somewhere she did not actually want to go. She had never quite managed it. The television was small and kept in a corner of her room that Mara pretended not to know about. Human broadcast, carefully filtered through a signal the community had rigged years ago so it could not be traced back to them. Nyla watched it in the hours when the community settled into its quiet routines, curled on her bed with the sound turned low enough that no one else could hear. She had watched enough human television by now to know that it was not a perfect picture of their world. She understood that. She was not naive enough to think that everything she saw was real or representative. She knew the difference between a story and reality. But there was something in it that she kept coming back to, something she had never been able to name precisely. The humans in those shows fought with each other and made up and fell in love badly and tried things that failed and tried them again. They were loud and messy and frequently foolish. They made decisions that made no strategic sense whatsoever. And underneath all of it, running through even the smallest moments, was something that felt like permission. Like they had been given, or had simply taken, the right to want ordinary things and pursue them without justifying it to anyone. The community arranges for their young to get experience in the human world and collect desires with supervision. One such mission had started cleanly enough. She had done this several times now, always under supervision, always with one of the older succubi close enough to pull her back if something went wrong. The process itself was not difficult. Finding the thread of a sleeping human's desire was as natural to her as breathing, and following it down into the architecture of their dream took almost no effort at all. She was good at this part. Myra had even acknowledged it once. The human was a middle-aged man, dreaming about a version of his life that was slightly better than the one he had. Nothing dramatic, things like having a bigger kitchen, a conversation with his father that had apparently never happened, a moment of being genuinely seen by someone whose approval he had spent years trying to earn. Nyla moved through it carefully, collecting what she needed, staying light and invisible the way she had been trained to do. And then he turned in the dream and looked directly at her. He could not actually see her. She knew that. She was not truly visible in the dream space, not unless she chose to be. But he looked at the space she occupied with an expression of such uncomplicated hope that something in her stopped moving. She stepped into his line of sight, just slightly, just enough for him to sense her. He smiled. In the dream, he smiled at her and said something to the version of her that his sleeping mind had assembled. And it was so entirely ordinary that it took her a moment to understand why it made her chest hurt. The pull came sharp and immediate, the supervising succubus dragging her back up and out, the dream dissolving behind her like smoke. She surfaced back into her own body in the community's training space with her heart running faster than it should have been and the older succubus looking at her with an expression of disapproval. Myra was already waiting when she got back. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. She sat across from Nyla in the main room of their shared quarters and spoke in the same measured, certain tone she used for everything, and laid out with complete clarity what Nyla had done wrong and why it mattered, and what the consequences that kind of carelessness would be if it happened in an unsupervised setting. She talked about exposure. She talked about control. She talked about the difference between a succubus who mastered their nature and one who was mastered by it. Nyla sat through all of it. She had sat through versions of this conversation before. "You are not like this because you are weak," Myra said near the end. "You are like this because you have not yet decided to be otherwise. That is a choice, Nyla. I need you to make it." Nyla said that she understood. She said it clearly even though she had no intention of becoming what Myra was describing. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. The television stayed off. The application had been drafted for 4 months. She had found the university's enrollment process through a human internet connection she was not supposed to have access to, had built a human identity carefully over the course of a year using methods the community had developed, and had filled out the form attentively. She looked at it for a long time before submitting it. The acceptance came 3 weeks later. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it at the bottom of the bag she had been quietly filling for longer than she wanted to admit. She stood at the window of her room and looked out past the community's careful walls toward the city beyond them. Out there, humans were moving through their loud and ordinary lives, going to sleep and dreaming small dreams and waking up to days that belonged entirely to them. Out there was a university full of people she had never met and a life of wonder and mystery. She was going to be free. She was going to finally actually live. She was certain of it. She picked up her bag and walked out. Chapter 2, The Human World. The first thing Nyla noticed about the school campus was the noise. Constant, layered, coming from every direction at once. Conversations bleeding into music, bleeding into someone's phone on speaker, bleeding into the general ambient sound of several thousand people existing in close proximity without any particular concern for keeping themselves contained. The community had been a quiet place. This was the opposite of that. Nyla stood at the edge of the main campus courtyard on the first morning with his single bag over one shoulder, and took it all in with focused attention. He had chosen psychology without a great deal of deliberation. It made sense for obvious reasons, understanding how humans thought, how desire formed and moved and attached itself to things, was territory he was already familiar with. He wanted to see what humans had figured out about themselves. He thought that would be interesting. The first week was mostly orientation, and Nyla figuring out where everything was and how everything worked. Nyla moved through it with his androgynous features and his deeper voice, and let people make whatever assumptions they were going to make. Most assumed he was male when he spoke. He did not correct anyone. It was easier, and also, in a way he could not entirely explain, it felt like the right presentation for this version of himself. This new human-adjacent Nyla who was going to have a normal life and figure out what that meant. He liked his dormitory. He liked his classes. He liked the dining hall at off-peak hours when it was half empty and he could sit by the window and watch the courtyard below. He liked that nobody here knew anything about him, that he was a blank page, and that he could be whatever he decided to be. He was happy, genuinely happy, and then the feeding problem started. He had known, in theory, that being away from the community would change things. The community had infrastructure he had never paid close attention to, arrangements with certain humans, controlled environments for supervised feeding, resources that quietly ensured the young ones were never running low for long. He had taken all of it for granted. The university was extraordinary for someone of his nature. He had known desire academically, had fed on it carefully in controlled, supervised settings, had understood it as a resource to be managed. He had not understood what it would feel like to walk into a building full of 18 to 22-year-olds living away from home for the first time, every single one of them burning with wants they had never had the freedom to act on before. It was overwhelming, like stepping into a room that was too warm after a long time in the cold. But Nyla fed lightly. He had decided on this before he arrived, and he held to it. He was not going to drain anyone. He was not going to leave anyone waking up exhausted and hollowed out and unable to understand why. He took the edges off things, the surface of desires, enough to sustain without causing harm. What he had not calculated was how much more frequently that meant he needed to feed. Every other day on a normal week. More than that, if he used his abilities like shifting his appearance slightly, moving through crowds without drawing attention, the small constant maintenance of existing in a human space. The community had made all of that feel effortless. On his own, it cost more than he had budgeted for. He was not struggling exactly, but he was aware that he was not nearly as efficient as he needed to be. The gap between what he had been trained for and what he could actually sustain alone was something he was going to have to figure out. Nyla decided, however, to live life to the fullest. He went to a lot of parties and events. There was always something happening somewhere on campus, and Nyla had no difficulty finding it or inserting himself into it naturally. He was good at entering a room and finding the right register, the right energy, the right version of himself to present. He had been trained for exactly this kind of social navigation, even if the context his training had imagined was somewhat different. He enjoyed it, the music, the movement, and the way people loosened up after the first hour and became more honest with themselves. He liked watching that happen. He liked being in the middle of it. But there was a wall he could not quite get past, and he was aware of it. People liked him. He was easy to talk to at a party, easy to laugh with, easy to share a drink with in the kitchen while the music thumped through the walls from the next room. But when the party ended, everything ended with it. Nobody texted him the next day to ask if he wanted to get coffee. Nobody knocked on his door just to see what he was doing. He told himself it was fine. He told himself he preferred it this way. He had not come here to make friends. He had come here to live, and he was living, and it was everything he had wanted. This party was in one of the off-campus houses that upperclassmen rented in groups and immediately filled with furniture that did not match. Nyla had heard about it through the social osmosis of dormitory hallways and had shown up. He had been there for about an hour, working his way through the rooms when he saw Oliver. He was standing near the far end of the main room with a small group of people, holding a drink he did not seem particularly interested in, listening to someone tell a story. His attention settled fully on the person talking, and when they finished, he laughed at something they said, and the laugh had a lovely melody. His voice carried across the room when he spoke, clear and warm. When he made eye contact with the person next to him, it was direct, the kind of eye contact that made people feel seen. He had a way of standing that was relaxed. When he reached out to touch someone's arm briefly while making a point, his hand was gentle, almost unconsciously so. Nyla had fed on human desire for years. He had moved through dreams and collected the texture of what people wanted and needed and ached for. He had understood desire as a professional matter. He had not understood it as something that could physically happen to him. He stood very still for a moment. The party continued around him at full volume. He was not aware of most of it. Oliver looked up across the room and found Nyla's eyes with the same directness he gave everyone else and smiled. Just briefly, the easy smile of acknowledgement, simple and warm. Nyla had been taught since before he could fully remember that humans were lesser, that they were a resource and a risk in their history lessons. He was taught that he should always maintain an appropriate distance when dealing with humans. He knew all that, but still could not take his eyes off of Oliver throughout the night. After a couple of brief exchanges at the party, a shared drink, a laugh about something neither of them would remember later, Nyla and Oliver found themselves in a spare bedroom upstairs, the noise of the party muffled through the closed door, and hungry for each other. Time did not behave normally after that. It felt slow, and then suddenly it was gone, collapsing into the sensation of Oliver's soft hands on the arc of his back, the particular tenderness of someone who was paying attention directed entirely at Nyla. Oliver called out to him softly in the dark, and Nyla lost themselves in it completely. That was the part she could not explain afterward. She had fed before. She knew what desire felt like as a resource, knew how to take what she needed and leave cleanly. This was not that. The desire in that room was not something she was in control of. It was something that consumed her, and it was hers as much as it was his. She felt her skin burning everywhere Oliver touched her. Each point of contact felt like static electricity, like lightning running through their bodies. She felt herself absorbing his desire without meaning to, without the careful, measured intention of a feed, just drowning in the moment. The desire was overflowing, and she could not have stopped it even if she tried. She had never felt so lost to her own nature before, had never understood until that moment that losing yourself to desire could feel this good. Afterward, she lay beside Oliver and tried to understand what had made this different. She had no answer that satisfied her. She did not have a word for what had moved through her in that room. What she had trouble understanding is that it felt like the desire was also hers. The pleasure had moved through her differently than anything she had experienced before. The feeding from that one night lasted her just over a week. For someone who has had to feed every other day, sometimes more frequent, that was unprecedented. She did not approach Oliver again, not directly at least. She told herself this was for caution. He knew her face now, at least the one she had been wearing that night. If she went back to him looking the same way, he would remember her, would connect her to that night. And connection meant exposure, and exposure was the one thing she absolutely could not afford. She told herself this was a sensible calculation. And then, 3 nights later, she found herself in his dream. It was not difficult. She knew his face. She knew the particular frequency of his desire from that night. Finding his thread of desire from across a dormitory was almost effortless. She followed it down and arrived in the quiet architecture of his sleeping mind, wearing a different face, a different presentation, nothing he would connect to anyone he had met. She told herself she was there to feed. She told herself this was practical and necessary, and no different from any supervised mission she had run back in the community. She fed lightly. She stayed longer than she needed to. She came back the following night. She told herself that was fine, too. I hope you are enjoying this story so far. What magic power would you like to have? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 3. The Dreams and the Danger. The first time Nyla saw one of the Umbra Vanatori up close, she did not know what she was looking at. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2 months into the semester. She was crossing the main quad toward the psychology building when she noticed a man standing near the east entrance of the library. He was dressed like campus security, clipboard in hand, but he was not watching the building. He was watching the students. His eyes moved from face to face with a kind of focused attention that had nothing to do with checking IDs. Nyla kept walking. She did not slow down. She did not look at him longer than anyone else would have. But something in the back of her mind registered it and would not let go. 2 days later, she saw him again, same spot, same clipboard. This time there was a woman with him, younger, dressed like a graduate student, leaning against the wall and scrolling through her phone. Except her phone's screen was dark. Nyla could see it from 20 feet away. The woman was holding a dead phone and pretending to use it while her eyes tracked people walking through the quad. Nyla changed her route to class the next morning. She took the long way around through the arts building and came out near the south entrance instead. She told herself she was being cautious. She told herself this was probably nothing. On Friday, she found the man standing at the south entrance. She went cold from the inside out, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. She could feel her heart rate spike and her hands go tight at her sides, and every instinct she had ever been trained on screaming at her to leave immediately and not come back. She went to her dorm room and locked the door and sat on the floor with her back against the wall and tried to think clearly. They were looking for someone, that much was obvious. Whether they were looking for her specifically, she could not tell. She had been careful, she had fed lightly. She had not revealed herself to anyone in a way that should have drawn attention. But she also knew, from everything Mara had told her and everything the community had drilled into her since childhood, that the Umbra Vanatori did not need much. A pattern of unusual fatigue among students near a particular dormitory. A roommate mentioning that someone never seemed to eat. A professor noticing that a student's records did not quite match up under close inspection. Small things. The kind of things that only mattered if someone was already looking. Nyla stopped feeding entirely. She could not risk it. If they were monitoring for signs of non-human activity on campus, even the lightest feed could register. She did not know what tools they had or how sensitive their methods were. She only knew that Mara had once told her, in one of their many conversations about caution, that the Umbra Vanatori had been doing this for 2,000 years, and they had gotten very good at it. The first day without feeding was uncomfortable. The second day was worse. By the third day, the hunger had settled into her bones and turned into something that felt like burning from the inside out. She could feel her control slipping in small ways. Her appearance flickered twice in the bathroom mirror before she steadied it. Her hands shook when she held her coffee cup in the dining hall. She could sense every desire in the building around her, every want and need and ache radiating off the students on her floor, and the effort of not reaching for any of it was physically exhausting. On the fourth day, she could barely get out of bed. She lay there for most of the morning, staring at the ceiling, trying to calculate how much longer she could hold out. Her body was telling her the answer was not much longer. She could feel herself thinning, and she did not mean just physically. Something essential was draining out of her, the part that kept her stable, the part that let her hold a single form and think in straight lines and remember who she was supposed to be. She needed to feed. She needed to feed that night or she was going to lose the ability to maintain her human appearance entirely. And if that happened on a campus the Umbra Vanatori were already watching, she was dead. She waited until well past midnight. She lay in her narrow dormitory bed and reached across the building for the thread she knew best, the one she could find in her sleep because she had found it so many times before. Oliver was dreaming. She followed the thread down into his mind and arrived in the familiar architecture of his dreamscape. She had been here dozens of times by now, wearing dozens of faces, taking dozens of forms. She knew this space better than she knew most real places. But tonight she did not have enough power to build a mask. She could feel it the moment she materialized. The disguise she normally wore in dreams, the careful construction of a different face and body and presence, required energy she simply did not have. She tried to pull one together and felt it dissolve before it could hold. She tried again. Nothing. She was standing in Oliver's dream looking exactly like herself. The face she had worn at the party. The form he had held in that spare bedroom upstairs. Oliver turned and looked at her. He did not look surprised. He looked like someone who had been waiting for a very long time to be proven right. "I know you," Oliver said. Nyla did not move. Every part of her wanted to run, to pull herself out of the dream and disappear and never come back. But she was so hungry that even the effort of being here was draining her, and leaving might take more energy than she had left. "You were at the party," Oliver said. He took a step closer. His voice was calm and careful. "You were there that night. That was you." Nyla could feel the desire radiating off him even now, warm and steady, and her whole body ached toward it. She tried to hold herself still. "All those dreams," Oliver continued. He was studying her face with the same focused attention she had noticed the first time she saw him across that crowded room. "Different people every time, different faces, but it was always you, wasn't it?" It was not a question. "I don't understand what you are," Oliver said. "I don't understand how any of this is possible. But I know it's you." I knew after the second time. There was something that felt the same every time no matter what you looked like. Nyla could feel her form wavering at the edges. She was running out of time. "If we're going to do this," Oliver said quietly, "can you at least be honest with me? Can you just be yourself, whatever that looks like? I don't care what form it takes. I just want it to be real. Something in Nyla broke open at that. She did not have a better word for it. It was not a dramatic collapse. It was the quiet giving way of a wall she had been leaning against for months. She stopped trying to hide. She let the last scraps of disguise fall away and stood there as herself. The version of herself Oliver had met at the party, the one that was closest to who she actually was when she was not trying to be anything else. Oliver looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and put his hand on the side of her face, gently, the same unconscious tenderness she remembered from that night. She let herself fall into him. She let the desire wash over her and through her, and she did not try to control it or measure it or take only what she needed. She took everything. Oliver gave it freely, pulling her closer, his hands warm and steady and certain. The sensation was overwhelming in a way that went beyond physical hunger. She could feel herself filling back up, the burning emptiness of 4 days receding like water pulling back from a shore. She lost track of time. She lost track of where the dream ended and where she began. She felt herself sinking deeper into his consciousness, settling into the warmth of it, and some distant alarm in the back of her mind told her she needed to leave. She needed to surface. She was falling asleep inside his dream, and that was the one thing every succubus was taught from childhood never to do because a human mind could absorb you, could dissolve you into its own architecture until there was nothing left to pull back out. She knew this. She had been warned about it by Mara. She had been warned about it by every older succubus who had ever supervised her training. She stayed anyway. She was too tired and too full and too lost in the feeling of being seen, actually seen, by someone who had asked her to stop pretending. She closed her eyes inside Oliver's dream and let go. 2 months ago, Nyla's perspective. 2 months earlier, Nyla had told herself she would only visit Oliver's dreams once. That was the first lie. The second lie was that it was only about feeding. The truth was that Oliver's dreamscape was the most fascinating place she had ever been, and she could not stay away from it. His desires were not what she had expected. The other humans she had fed on during her supervised training back in the community had wanted predictable things. More money, more status, a lost relationship restored, a version of their lives that was slightly larger or slightly easier than the one they had. Oliver's mind was different. His desires ran deeper and stranger, and they changed depending on how she presented herself to him, as if his subconscious was responding to whatever form she took and reshaping itself around the possibilities. The first time she returned after the party, she entered his dream as a man. Tall, lean, darker features than the face she had worn that night. She wanted to see if the desire would still be there if the form was completely different. It was. Oliver's sleeping mind reached for her with the same intensity regardless of what she looked like. It unsettled her and fascinated her in equal measure. The second time, she entered as a woman with sharp features and long dark hair, nothing like her party appearance. She moved through his dream carefully, collecting desire, telling herself she was being clinical about it. She was not. The third time, Oliver's desires surprised her completely. She had entered his dream without a strong form in mind, something close to her natural state, androgynous and tall, and his subconscious had responded by building a dream around it. She found herself in a landscape that did not look entirely human. The sky was a color she had never seen in the waking world. Oliver was there, and he was looking at her with an expression of pure fascination, and his desire in that moment was directed at something he had clearly never seen before and wanted desperately to understand. He wanted other beings. That was the realization that stopped her. His deepest desires were not for any specific human form. They were for something outside of human entirely. His subconscious craved the unfamiliar, the mythical, the things he had no name for but ached toward anyway. When she shifted into something closer to her true succubus form, taller, sharper, less human in the details, his desire spiked so intensely that she had to pull back to keep from draining him. She explored this over several visits. Each time she pushed further into his subconscious architecture and found more. He dreamed of beings with fangs and inhuman strength. He dreamed of creatures that moved through the night with the kind of grace that belonged to something ancient. He dreamed of her in her fullest form, standing 7 feet tall with her true features unhidden, and the desire that came off him in those moments was the strongest she had ever felt from any human. She found this terrifying and wonderful, and she did not know what to do with either feeling. Oliver started remembering. It began after the second visit. He woke up with pieces of the dreams still clinging to him, fragments he could not quite place but could not shake either. By the third visit, he was remembering full sequences, sensations, the feeling of being close to someone whose body did not move or feel the way a human body did, the lingering impression that something extraordinary had been in his mind while he slept. He told his friend Marcus about it over lunch in the dining hall. "I keep having these dreams," Oliver said, "and they feel real, like genuinely, physically real. Not like normal dreams." Marcus looked at him over a plate of dining hall pasta and raised both eyebrows. "Like vivid dreams?" Marcus asked. "That happens when you're stressed or when you eat too late." "No, not like that," Oliver said. "Like someone is there, different people every time, but it feels like the same person." Marcus put his fork down. "Bro, are you telling me you're having recurring sex dreams about a shapeshifter?" "I'm telling you it feels real," Oliver said, and he meant it. "You've been watching too much Game of Thrones," Marcus said. He picked his fork back up and pointed it at Oliver. "Or you need to get out more. When's the last time you actually went on a date?" Oliver let it drop. He could tell Marcus was not going to take it seriously, and he did not want to push it far enough that Marcus started genuinely worrying about him. But he could not let it go. He went to the university library the following week. He was not sure what he was looking for exactly. He browsed the mythology section for a while, pulled a few books on dream interpretation, and sat at a table near the back corner feeling slightly ridiculous. A student was sitting 2 tables over, surrounded by a stack of books that were considerably older and heavier than anything Oliver had picked up. The kid looked young, maybe a sophomore, with an intense, focused energy. Oliver glanced at the spines of the books near him. Folkloric accounts, historical records of supernatural encounters, a thick leather-bound volume with a title in Latin. "Doing research?" Oliver asked, mostly because the silence in that corner of the library felt suffocating. The kid looked up. His eyes were sharp and interested. "Always," the kid said. "You." "Something like that," Oliver said. He hesitated, and then, because the kid's books looked like exactly the kind of thing he needed, and because he had nobody else to talk to about this, he told him. He told him about the dreams, the recurring visits, the different forms, the persistent feeling that it was one being, the same consciousness wearing different faces each time. The kid listened without interrupting, without laughing, without telling him he needed to eat earlier or watch less television. "How long has this been happening?" the kid asked when Oliver finished. "About 6 weeks," Oliver said. The kid nodded slowly. He pulled one of his books closer and opened it to a page marked with a small strip of paper. "Can I ask you something?" the kid said. "When this being visits you, do you feel tired the next day, drained?" Oliver thought about it. Sometimes, not always, it depends on the dream. The kid nodded again. They talked for another hour. The kid, whose name Oliver never got around to asking, seemed genuinely fascinated and asked detailed questions about the sensations, the atmosphere of the dreams, the specific forms the being had taken. Oliver answered as honestly as he could. He felt relieved to talk to someone who did not immediately dismiss it. He did not notice that the kid took notes after he left. He did not notice that the kid photographed the page he had been reading before closing the book. He did not connect any of it to anything that would matter later. After the third vivid dream, Oliver laid awake for a long time in the dark of his dorm room and let himself think clearly about what was happening. Either he was losing his mind, or someone was visiting him while he slept. Someone who could change their shape. Someone who felt the same every time regardless of how they appeared. Someone whose presence in his dreams left a warmth that lasted through the following day and made the waking world feel slightly flatter by comparison. He wanted to meet them. He wanted to speak to them when he was awake, face to face, without the shifting dreamscape between them. He wanted to know who they were and why they kept coming back and whether any part of it was as real as it felt. He turned onto his side and stared at the wall and thought about the being who kept entering his dreams and leaving before morning. He hoped they would come back. He did not know that halfway across campus, the kid from the library was writing a report that would eventually make its way to people who had been watching this university for a very long time. Chapter 4, The Longest Day. Oliver was still watching her when it started. They were inside his dream, the two of them sitting in a version of the campus courtyard that his sleeping mind had assembled from memory. The light was golden and warm, and the details were slightly wrong in the way dream details always are. The trees were taller than they should have been. The buildings curved at angles that did not exist in the waking world. But Oliver was sitting beside her looking exactly like himself, and for a few minutes that was enough. He was looking at her with a quiet, careful expression. She could tell he was thinking about what would happen when he woke up, whether any of this would hold, whether she would still be real when the dream ended. "When I wake up," Oliver said, "are you going to be gone?" "I don't know," Nyla said. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in months. Oliver nodded. He did not push it. He sat there in the golden light of his own dreaming mind and looked at her the way he looked at everything, with his full attention, and Nyla felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for a very long time. Then the pain hit. It started in her center, a pressure that built rapidly into something sharp and disorienting. She felt her form flicker. The dream version of herself that Oliver was looking at began to shift against her will, the edges blurring and reforming and blurring again. Oliver's expression changed. "Hey, what's happening?" Nyla could not answer. The pain was spreading outward from her chest into her limbs, and her vision was going white at the edges. She could feel her consciousness being pulled downward, deeper into the dream, into the layers of Oliver's mind where no succubus should ever go. This was what Mara had warned her about. This was the absorption. She had stayed too long, and now the dream was trying to keep her. "Nyla," Oliver said. He was on his feet now. His voice had changed. "Nyla, look at me." She tried. Her eyes found his face, but it was distorted, stretched thin, like looking at someone through water. She could feel her body in the waking world growing cold. She could feel the boundary between herself and Oliver's dreaming mind getting thinner with every second. Her form twisted. She heard herself make a sound that she had never heard before, something between a gasp and a cry, and it scared her more than the pain did because it meant she was losing control of things she had never lost control of. Oliver grabbed her shoulders. "Wake up, you need to wake up right now." She could not. She tried to pull herself out the way she had been trained to do, reaching for the surface of the dream the way a drowning person reaches for air, and there was nothing to grab onto. She was sinking. Oliver could see it happening. She was getting paler in front of him, her breathing turning shallow and ragged, her body flickering between forms as if her mind could no longer decide what she was supposed to look like. The golden light in the dream was dimming. The courtyard around them was going dark. "No," Oliver said. "No, this is not happening." The dreamscape was destabilizing. Oliver could feel it because it was his dream and it was responding to his fear. The ground was shaking. The buildings were folding in on themselves. The sky had gone the color of a bruise, and the warm light was gone entirely. Oliver held on to her and tried to think. He did not understand what was happening. He did not understand what she was or how any of this worked. But he understood that she was dying in front of him and that this was his mind, and that if his mind was doing this to her, then his mind could also stop it. He focused. He closed his eyes inside the dream and concentrated on the one thing he could feel most clearly, which was the static electricity that had been there every time they touched. That particular charge, that specific frequency of contact that felt like lightning deciding to be gentle. He gathered it. He did not know how he knew to do this, but he did it anyway, pulling the sensation together from every memory of every dream and every real moment between them, until he could feel it building in his hands like a physical thing. He put both hands on her chest and pushed. The shock went through Nyla like a detonation. Her whole body convulsed. The dream shattered around them like glass, and she was thrown upward, out of the dreamscape, out of the deep layers of his consciousness, up through the surface of his sleeping mind, and back into her own body in her own dormitory bed, where she gasped awake so violently that she knocked her pillow onto the floor. She lay there shaking. Her heart was hammering and her skin was covered in sweat, and she could still feel the electric charge in her chest, fading slowly. Across the campus, in his own dorm room, Oliver was awake too. He was sitting up in bed, breathing hard, his hands trembling. He felt hollowed out. Whatever he had done in the dream had taken everything he had. Nyla reached for his thread of desire instinctively and found it dim and exhausted. She pulled her hand back. She was not going to take anything from him, not after what he had just done. She lay in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ghost of the electric shock still humming in her bones. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I thought you weren't going to wake up. That took everything I had." She stared at the message. She did not know how Oliver had gotten her number. She did not care. She typed back, "Thank you." A pause, then, "We need to talk, actually talk, not in a dream." "I know," she typed. "I want to meet somewhere public, get coffee or something." Nyla stared at the screen. The thought of being in public, of being visible, of sitting in a coffee shop where anyone could see her, made her chest go tight again. After 4 days of hiding from the Umbra Vanatori, after nearly dying in a dream, the idea of walking into an open space felt impossible. Oliver must have read something in the silence, because another message came through before she could respond. "Or I can just come to you, your dorm, we can talk there, whatever makes you comfortable." She exhaled, "My dorm tomorrow." "I'll be there," Oliver replied. She put the phone down and closed her eyes. She was alive. Oliver had pulled her out of something she might not have come back from. Tomorrow she was going to tell him everything. She was going to trust someone for the first time since she had left the community. She fell asleep without entering anyone's dream for the first time in weeks. The morning came and Nyla waited. She had showered and dressed and cleaned the small dorm room until it looked like someone who had their life together lived there. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited for a knock on the door. The knock did not come. By 10 o'clock she was pacing. By 11 she was sitting at the window watching the path that led to her building. By noon, her mind was doing what it always did when something felt uncertain, which was constructing every possible worst case and cycling through them at speed. This was a trap. Oliver had told someone. Oliver had been working with them the whole time. Oliver had woken up and decided the whole thing was insane and wanted nothing to do with her. Something had happened to him. She should go out and look for him. She should not go out because the Umbra Vanatori were still out there, and every step she took outside was a risk. She went back and forth between these possibilities for the better part of an hour, getting more agitated with each cycle. Then she heard a knock on the door. She jumped to her feet. She did not check the peephole. She did not pause. She crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled the door open, expecting Oliver's warm eyes and easy smile. It was not Oliver. A young kid stood in the hallway wearing glasses and carrying a messenger bag that looked too heavy for his frame. Behind him, leaning against the opposite wall with her arms crossed, was a woman Nyla recognized immediately. The same woman from the quad. The one who had been holding a dead phone and watching students walk past. Nyla's mind went completely blank. She stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except stare at the 2 people in front of her while every alarm in her body fired simultaneously. The kid smiled. It was a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well," the kid said, looking her up and down with a sharp interest. "What do we have here?" He tilted his head slightly. "Mind if we come in? We need to talk to you." Nyla could feel sweat forming on her forehead. Her mouth was dry. She could not think of a single thing to say that would sound normal. They did not wait for an invitation. The kid stepped forward and Nyla stepped back automatically, a reflex she could not control, and they were inside her room before she had consciously decided to let them in. The woman closed the door behind her. The kid sat down on Nyla's desk chair as if he had been invited to sit. The woman remained standing near the door with her arms still crossed. "We have it on good authority," the kid said, "that someone on this campus has been feeding on students, entering their dreams, taking what they want, operating without any oversight or accountability." He pushed his glasses up and looked at Nyla with an expression that was halfway between curiosity and something colder. "You thought you could come here and just help yourself whenever you felt like it." "I don't know what you're talking about," Nyla said. His voice came out wrong. Too fast, too high, nothing like the calm, steady version of himself he had been maintaining for months. "I've been sick. I've barely left this room in days." "Yeah," the woman by the door said flatly. "I bet you have." The kid leaned forward in the chair. "Here's what we know. We know what you are. We know how long you've been here. We know what you've been doing in the dream space, and we know exactly which student you've been targeting, so you can drop the act any time." Nyla's mind was running at 1,000 miles an hour. He could feel his form threatening to flicker at the edges, and he clenched his jaw and held it steady through sheer force of will. He did not know what to say. Every answer he could think of would either confirm what they already suspected or sound so unconvincing that it would confirm it anyway. "I haven't hurt anyone," Nyla said. "I haven't taken anything that wasn't freely given. I haven't done anything wrong." "We'll be the judge of that," the kid said. He stood up from the chair. "You're going to have to come with us. You have some things to answer for." "No," Nyla said. The word came out harder than he expected. "I don't think so. You can't just come into my room and take me somewhere. I'm a student here. I have rights." The kid and the woman exchanged a look. The kid's polite smile reappeared. "You're a succubus enrolled under a false identity feeding on human students in their sleep," the kid said. "You don't have the kind of rights you think you have." Nyla felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there, but underneath it something older was surfacing, something Mara had put there whether Nyla wanted it or not. A survival instinct that had been bred into succubi across thousands of years of being hunted. Nyla dropped his center of gravity slightly and felt the energy in the room change. The woman by the door noticed immediately. She uncrossed her arms. "Don't," the woman said. Nyla did not hear the third one. The door had opened behind the woman without a sound. Nyla caught a glimpse of a figure in the hallway, arm raised, and then something sharp punched into the side of his neck. The tranquilizer was fast. His vision went dark from the edges inward, like a camera iris closing, and the last thing he registered before he lost consciousness was the floor coming up to meet him. Oliver arrived at Nyla's dormitory at 2 in the afternoon. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open and stopped. The room was destroyed. The desk was overturned. The chair was on its side against the wall. Nyla's bag, the one bag that had come with her from the community, was torn open, and its contents were scattered across the floor. The bedsheets were pulled halfway off the mattress. A glass of water had been knocked off the nightstand, and the water was still pooled on the floor, which meant this had happened recently. Nyla was not there. Oliver stood in the doorway for 10 seconds processing what he was looking at. Then he turned and ran. The building's security office was on the ground floor near the main entrance. Oliver pushed through the door and found a middle-aged man behind a desk eating a sandwich. "Someone broke into a room on the 3rd floor," Oliver said. He was breathing hard. "Room 317. The place is trashed. The student who lives there is gone." The security guard looked at him over his sandwich with an expression of mild inconvenience. "3rd floor, that's freshman housing." "Yes," Oliver said, "and it's been broken into." "Freshmen do that kind of thing," the guard said. He put the sandwich down and wiped his hands. "Parties get out of hand. Someone locks themselves out and their friends bust in through the window. I'll file a report, but honestly it happens every other week up there." "This is not a party," Oliver said. His voice was getting louder and he could not control it. "The room is destroyed. The person who lives there is missing. Something happened." The guard pulled a form from a drawer and set it on the desk. "I'll file a report," he repeated, in the tone of someone who considered the conversation finished. Oliver stared at him. He wanted to reach across the desk and shake the man, but he knew it would accomplish nothing. He turned and walked back out into the lobby, his mind racing, trying to think of who to call or where to go or what to do next. There were students in the lobby. A few of them were watching him. 2 in particular caught his attention because they were not watching him with casual curiosity. They were watching him with recognition. One was tall and pale with dark hair. The other was broader, darker, with close-cropped hair and an energy that reminded Oliver of someone who was always slightly too warm for the room they were in. Oliver knew them. He had gone to the same middle school. They had been the quiet ones, the kids who kept to themselves and sat together at lunch and never quite mixed with anyone else. He had not thought about them in years. The tall one was Sarah's. The broader one was Defan. Oliver remembered that much. They walked toward him. Sarah's moved like he was cutting through water. Defan moved like the ground owed him something. "Oliver," Sarah said. His voice was quiet and even. "It's been a long time." "Yeah," Oliver said. He was not in the mood for small talk, and it must have been obvious because Defan stepped in immediately. "We saw what happened in there," Defan said, nodding toward the security office. "You looked like you were about to put that guy through his desk. What's going on?" Oliver opened his mouth and then closed it. He looked at the two of them standing there, calm and attentive and clearly not asking out of idle curiosity, and something in their expressions told him they already knew more than they were letting on. "Not here," Sarah said before Oliver could decide what to say. "Come with us." They walked him out of the building and across campus to one of the green spaces on the east side. It was a patch of grass between two older buildings that most students avoided because it was out of the way and there was nothing nearby worth walking to. Nobody was around. They sat on the grass. Sarah's and Defan sat across from Oliver, close enough to talk quietly. "Start at the beginning," Sarah said. Oliver told them everything. He told them about the party. He told them about Nyla. He told them about the conversation in the dream last night. He told them about Nyla nearly dying in his dreamscape and how he had somehow shocked her awake. He told them about the text messages and the plan to meet today and the destroyed room he had found instead. He talked fast and without pausing, and by the time he was finished, he was out of breath. Sarah's and Defan looked at each other. The look lasted about 3 seconds and contained a conversation that Oliver could not read. "This is not good," Defan said. His expression had gone hard. "This is really not good." "What do you mean?" Oliver said. "Who would do this? Who would break into a dorm room and take a student?" "The Umbra Vanatori," Sarah said. Oliver stared at him. "What the hell is that?" "We don't have time for a history lesson right now," Defan said. He was already getting to his feet. "If they have her, and depending on how long ago they took her, she could be out of the city by tonight. We need to move." "Out of the city," Oliver said. "What are you talking about? Who are you people?" "We're people who can help," Sarah said. He stood as well, brushing grass off his pants with a calm that seemed impossible given what Defan had just said. "Oliver, I need you to trust us for the next few hours. Can you do that?" "I don't understand any of this," Oliver said. "I know," Sarah said, "and I'm sorry, but if we don't find her soon, understanding won't matter." Defan tilted his head back slightly and inhaled through his nose. He held it for a moment. Then he turned to face the older buildings on the south end of campus. "I have her scent," Defan said. "Faint, but it's there. They went south." Oliver looked at Defan, and a question formed on his face that he did not ask because the answer was already obvious, and because he could see that Defan's eyes had changed. The pupils were different. The irises were a shade of amber that did not exist in the human spectrum. "Werewolf," Defan said without looking at him. "Sarah's is half vampire. We can do introductions later. Right now we move." Defan led them south across campus at a pace that was just short of running. He kept his head slightly raised, nostrils flaring at intervals, adjusting their direction in small corrections as the trail shifted. Sarah's moved beside him with ease. Oliver kept up. He did not understand what was happening. He did not understand how two kids he had gone to middle school with had turned out to be a werewolf and a half-vampire. He did not understand what the Umbra Vanatori was, or why they had taken Nyla, or how any of this was possible. But Nyla was somewhere in the direction they were heading, and that was enough to keep his feet moving. The trail led them to the old Sciences building on the far south edge of campus. It had been partially decommissioned 2 years ago when the new Sciences complex opened on the north side. The upper floors were still used for storage and the occasional overflow lecture, but the basement levels had been locked and forgotten. Defan stopped at a service entrance on the side of the building. The lock had been replaced recently. Sarah stepped forward, examined it for about 2 seconds, and then pulled it off the door with one hand. The metal twisted and gave way with a sound that made Oliver flinch. "Half vampire," Sarah said, and opened the door. The stairwell going down was dark and smelled like old concrete and cleaning chemicals. Defan went first. His eyes were fully amber now, and Oliver could see that he was navigating without difficulty in the near-total darkness. Sarah's followed. Oliver brought up the rear, one hand on the wall, trusting the two figures ahead of him to know where they were going. They went down 2 flights. The air got colder. At the bottom of the second flight, there was a heavy door with light leaking out from underneath it. Defan held up one hand. He pressed his ear to the door, listened for about 5 seconds, then held up 3 fingers, 3 people on the other side. Sarah's nodded once. He looked at Oliver. "Stay behind us." Defan kicked the door open. The room was a converted storage space, cleared out and fitted with temporary lighting, and a folding table covered in papers and equipment. 3 people were inside. The kid with glasses was sitting at the table. The woman from the quad was standing near the far wall. A third operative, the one who had fired the tranquilizer, was sitting on a chair near a second door that presumably led deeper into the basement. Nyla was on the floor against the far wall, hands bound with something that looked like a thin metallic cord. She was conscious, but barely. Her eyes were half open and unfocused, and her skin was the wrong color, too pale, almost translucent. She had been sedated again at some point. The cord around her wrists had a faint shimmer to it that Sarah's recognized immediately. "Binding wire," Sarah said under his breath. "It suppresses non-human abilities. They came prepared." Defan did not waste time on observation. He crossed the room in 3 strides and hit the third operative before the man could stand up. The impact sent the chair skidding backward into the wall. The man did not get up. The woman by the far wall moved fast. She pulled something from her belt that looked like a short baton and extended it with a flick of her wrist. She swung at Defan and he caught it with his forearm. The sound of metal meeting bone was louder than it should have been. Defan did not flinch. His other hand closed around the baton and he pulled it out of her grip and tossed it across the room. The woman backed up. She was reaching for something else on her belt when Sarah's appeared beside her. Oliver had not seen him move. One moment he was at the door. The next moment he was standing next to the woman with his hand around her wrist in a grip that made her face go white. "Stop," Sarah said quietly. "This is finished." The kid with glasses had not moved from the table. He was sitting very still, watching Defan and Sarah's with an expression that had transitioned rapidly from confidence to careful assessment. Oliver crossed the room to Nyla. He dropped to his knees beside her and put his hands on her face. She was cold. Her eyes found his and he could see recognition in them, distant and muddled by the sedation but present. "I'm here," Oliver said. "We're getting you out." Sarah's released the woman's wrist and walked to where Nyla was sitting. He examined the binding wire for a moment, then snapped it with both hands. The metal parted with a bright, sharp sound, and Nyla gasped as if something had been pressing on her chest and had suddenly let go. Oliver helped her to her feet. She leaned into him heavily. She could barely stand. "We're leaving," Defan said. He was standing in the center of the room, facing the kid at the table, and his voice carried the low rumble of someone who was keeping himself very carefully in check. "And you're going to let us." "You can't just take her," the kid said. His voice was steady, but his eyes kept moving between Defan and Sarah's, and the calculations happening behind them were visible. "She was feeding on human students without authorization. We have jurisdiction." "You don't have jurisdiction over anything," Sarah said. He had moved to stand beside Defan, and his posture had changed into something that made the room feel smaller. "You have a basement and a tranquilizer gun and a lot of assumptions." They walked toward the door. Oliver supported Nyla on one side, and Defan positioned himself between them and the table where the kid was still sitting. Sarah's walked behind them, facing backward, watching. They made it to the stairwell. They made it up 1 flight. Then the door at the top of the stairs opened and someone new was standing there. He was older than the others. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, with gray at his temples and the bearing of someone who was accustomed to being in charge. He wore a dark coat and no visible weapons. 2 more operatives stood behind him. "That's far enough," the man said. Defan stopped on the stairs. His shoulders were tight. The man looked past Defan at Nyla, leaning on Oliver, barely conscious. Then he looked at Sarah's. His expression shifted slightly when he registered what Sarah's was. "You're Sarah's Vurin," the man said. It was not a question. "I am," Sarah said. "Your family holds a compact with this region's chapter," the man said. "You know that." "I know it well," Sarah said, "which is why I know you have a problem." The man's expression tightened. The Succubus was operating without oversight on a monitored campus. We were within our rights to investigate. "Investigate," Sarah said. "Not abduct, not sedate, not bind with suppression wire in a basement." He took 1 step up the stairs toward the man, and the 2 operatives behind him shifted their weight. "You know the terms of the Vurin Compact as well as I do. Article 7. No non-human individual shall be detained by any chapter of the Umbra Vanatori without evidence of direct and demonstrable harm to a human being. Detention without such evidence constitutes a breach of compact and may be treated as an act of aggression against the signatory family." The stairwell was very quiet. Do you have evidence of direct harm? Sarah's asked. Can you produce a human being who has been damaged, drained, injured, or compromised by her feeding? Because I've been looking at her since we found her in your basement, and what I see is a succubus who feeds so lightly that she nearly starved to death trying to avoid hurting anyone. The man said nothing. This chapter is new, Sarah's continued. His voice had not risen above conversational volume, and that was somehow worse than shouting. I know that. My family has been watching you establish yourselves here, and we have had no objections because the old families understand the need for the vanatori in every region. But this is not how it works. You do not pick up young non-humans off campus and disappear them into basements because you want to prove to the council that your chapter is active and effective. The man's jaw tightened visibly. So here is what is going to happen, Sarah said. We are going to walk out of this building. We are going to take Nyla with us. And you are going to let us. Because the alternative is that I contact my family tonight and they contact the regional council tomorrow, and by the end of the week this chapter is under formal review for a compact violation that will follow every single one of you for the rest of your careers. He paused. Or, Sarah said, we walk out now and nobody has to explain anything to anyone. The man looked at Sarah's for a long time. Then he looked at Defan, whose eyes were still amber and whose hands were clenched at his sides. Then he looked at Oliver, a human, standing in the middle of all of this holding up a succubus who could barely keep her eyes open. We'll be watching, the man said. He stepped aside. I would expect nothing less, Sarah's replied. They walked up the remaining stairs and out of the building into the late afternoon sun. The campus was quiet. A few students walked past without looking at them. Defan exhaled for what seemed like the first time in several minutes. That was close. That was necessary, Sarah said. Oliver adjusted his grip on Nyla. She was still leaning into him, still barely conscious, but her color was coming back slightly. Her hand found his arm and held on. Is she going to be okay? Oliver asked. She needs to feed, Defan said, and rest in that order. She can stay with me, Oliver said without hesitation. My room, she can rest there. Sarah's looked at him. It was the first time Oliver had seen anything close to warmth on his face. You're handling this remarkably well for someone who found out about werewolves and vampires an hour ago. I found out about succubi first, Oliver said. In a dream, everything after that has been easier by comparison. Defan laughed, and it changed his entire face. They walked across campus together, the four of them, in the late evening light. Nyla's hand stayed on Oliver's arm the whole way. Epilogue 6 months later. The coffee shop was 3 blocks off campus in a part of town that students rarely visited because it had no drink specials, no music, and the Wi-Fi was unreliable. Nyla had chosen it for exactly those reasons. She arrived 20 minutes early. She ordered a tea she did not intend to drink and sat in the corner booth facing the door and tried to keep her hands still. It had been almost a year since she had seen Mara. A full year since she had packed a bag and walked out of the community without telling anyone where she was going. She had rehearsed what she was going to say at least a dozen times over the past week, and none of the rehearsals had made her feel any more prepared. The door opened at exactly the time they had agreed on. Mara was never late. She looked the same, tall, composed, mid-40s by human standards, dressed in a way that was elegant without drawing attention. She scanned the room once, and then her eyes found Nyla in the corner booth. Mara walked over and sat down across from her. She set her bag on the seat beside her. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at Nyla for a long moment without speaking. It took you long enough, Mara said. Nyla exhaled. I know. The community was worried about you, Mara said. Her voice was even and controlled, the same voice Nyla had listened to for 7 years across training sessions and lectures and conversations that always felt like they were preparing her for something she did not want, but now it was oddly nostalgic. I was worried about you. You left without a word. You ran away like a child. I know, Nyla said again. You enrolled in a human university under a false identity, fed on human students without supervision, drew the attention of a local Umbra Vanatori chapter, and apparently got yourself abducted and bound with suppression wire in a basement, Mara said. She listed these items with the calm thoroughness of someone reading an incident report. Did I miss anything? Nyla winced. How do you know all of that? We heard you were in the territory of the Vernon family, Mara said. The vampire house, and that a young werewolf from the Ashwood pack was involved as well. When the Vernon family invokes a compact clause against a regional vanatory chapter to free a succubus, word travels. We knew within a week. Nyla sat with that for a moment. She had spent the entire year feeling like she was navigating alone, that every decision she made was hers and hers only, that nobody from the community knew or cared where she had ended up. She had been wrong about that. The thought was equal parts comforting and unsettling. Something really bad could have happened to you, Mara said. Her voice shifted slightly on that sentence. It was still controlled, but there was something underneath it that Nyla recognized as the closest Mara ever came to expressing fear. If you had not been fortunate enough to land near a Vernon and an Ashwood who were willing to intervene, that chapter would have had you on a transport out of the city within hours, and the community would not have known until it was too late to do anything about it. I know, Nyla said. She meant it this time. Mara looked at her across the table. The silence lasted long enough that Nyla braced herself for the lecture she had been expecting since the moment she sent the invitation. The recitation of everything she had done wrong and everything she should have done instead, and every way the path she had chosen was dangerous and foolish, and beneath what Mara had raised her to be. I am proud of you, Mara said. Nyla stared at her. What you did was reckless, Mara continued. I want to be clear about that. It was reckless and impulsive, and you could have died in at least 3 separate ways that I can identify from what I've been told. But what you did was also brave, and it was yours. You chose a path, you walked it, you found people who stood beside you when it mattered, you learned about the world on your own terms. She paused. That is a true sign of maturity, Nyla, carving your own path. Standing up for yourself, learning the world as it actually is rather than as the community describes it. Nyla could feel something building behind her eyes that she was not going to let happen in a coffee shop. You do not have to do it alone, Mara said. That is the part you have not learned yet. The older generation, myself included, has walked pieces of this path before. We are resources to you if you allow us to be. We have made our own mistakes, and we have things to offer that do not require you to give up what you've built here. Nyla nodded. She did not trust her voice. Your experience has shown us something as well, Mara said. She leaned back slightly in her seat, and for the first time since sitting down, she looked like someone having a conversation rather than delivering an assessment. The community has been closed for a long time. We are not ready to enter the human world. I do not think we will be for some time, perhaps not in your lifetime, but we can do better than what we have been doing. The Vernon family has a compact with the Vanatory. The Ashwood pack has similar arrangements in their territories. We have nothing. We have walls and secrecy and resentment. That has kept us alive, but it has not allowed us to grow. She looked at Nyla. We are going to explore something different, opening channels with other non-human communities, learning from the families and packs that have found ways to exist alongside the human world without disappearing into it entirely. Your experience forced us to ask questions we had been avoiding for a very long time. Nyla smiled. It was small and unsteady and real. So I did something right by accident. You did something right on purpose, Mara said. The accidents were everything that happened afterward. They talked for another hour. Nyla told Mara about her classes, about the campus, about learning to feed carefully and responsibly without the community's infrastructure, about the loneliness of the first months and how it had changed after the 4 of them had found each other. She talked about Sarah's and Defan and what she had learned from them about how other non-human families navigated the human world. Mara listened. She asked questions. She did not interrupt or correct. It was the first conversation they had ever had that felt like 2 people sitting across from each other rather than a guardian and a charge. When it was time to leave, Mara stood and gathered her bag and looked at Nyla with an expression that contained more warmth than Nyla had ever seen on her face before. Write to me, Mara said. Not just when something goes wrong. Write to me when things are ordinary. I would like to know what ordinary looks like for you. I will, Nyla said. Mara nodded once and walked out of the coffee shop and into the street. Nyla watched her go. She sat alone in the booth for a few minutes afterward, turning the conversation over in her mind, letting it settle. She felt lighter than she had in a long time. The weight of the year, the fear and the loneliness and the constant running had not disappeared, but it had shifted into something she could carry without it pressing down on her. She gathered her things and stepped outside. The afternoon was warm and the street was quiet, and the campus was a few blocks away in the direction of the setting sun. She saw Oliver before he saw her. He was coming around the corner of the building across the street, walking with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere else to be. He was looking for her. When he spotted her standing outside the coffee shop, his whole face opened up into a kind of smile, and then he waved. A smile crept across Nyla's face before she even realized it was happening. She stood there on the sidewalk with the evening light on her shoulders, and Oliver crossing the street toward her, and she felt something she had been chasing since the day she first turned on that small television in her room in the community and watched humans live their loud and messy and ordinary lives. She felt at peace, she felt content. She walked toward him and embraced him into a big hug. Quote of the week: "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Carl Jung. Thank you for listening to Dreambound. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to hear more, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. New stories are uploaded every Friday.